She was born to rule a star system, but they stripped her of her crown and slapped a barcode on her neck. When the galaxy's most ruthless syndicate sold the alien princess into slavery, they forgot one terrifying detail. Her human bodyguard was still breathing, and humans don't forgive. Declan Hayes tasted copper. Blood pooled in the corner of his mouth, warm and thick, as the concussive ringing in his ears slowly faded into the chaotic symphony of a dying palace. The marble floors of the Altari royal spire, imported at immense cost from the quarries of Alpha Centauri, were scorched black by plasma fire and littered with the bodies of the royal guard. Declan, a former United States Marine who had transitioned into private security with Triple Canopy Interstellar, had seen governments collapse before. He had seen the dust settle over regime changes in the resource wars of Earth, and he knew the sterile, calculated violence of corporate coups backed by names like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. But this was different. This was deeply, unacceptably personal. For 3 years, Declan had been the personal shadow of Princess Aurelia of the Altari. The Altari were a graceful humanoid species renowned for their diplomatic prowess and their vast reserves of zero-point isotope. They were not warriors. When humanity entered the galactic stage, bringing with them a terrifying aptitude for kinetic violence and tactical warfare, the Altari royal family had done what any intelligent billionaires would do. They hired human muscle, but no amount of human muscle could stop a betrayal from the inside. The coup had been sudden, ruthless, and impeccably timed. Prime Minister Tybalt, Aurelia's own uncle, had disabled the planetary defense grid during a diplomatic gala. The attackers weren't ragtag insurgents. They were a highly organized syndicate known as the Crimson Syndicate, equipped with military-grade shielding and phase-pulse rifles. Declan pushed himself up against a shattered crystalline pillar. His left arm hung uselessly at his side. The shoulder armor of his rig had melted away from a grazing plasma shot. Through the smoke, he saw them. For syndicate enforcers, towering reptilian brutes, were dragging Aurelia across the courtyard. Her ceremonial silk gown was torn. Her ethereal pale blue skin was bruised, but her chin was held high. She did not scream. The Altari were too proud for that. "Let her go," Declan rasped, his voice sounding like grinding gravel. He brought up his sidearm, a heavy Earth-made .45 caliber kinetic pistol that the aliens often mocked as primitive, right until it shattered their energy shields through sheer physical momentum. He fired twice. The massive rounds tore through the neck of the lead enforcer, bypassing his thermal shield entirely. The brute collapsed in a fountain of dark blood. Before Declan could acquire a second target, a shockwave slammed into his chest. Tybalt stepped through the clearing smoke, flanked by syndicate heavies and a man Declan recognized with a sickening jolt of realization. Charles Kensington. Kensington was the human ambassador from the United Earth Directorate, a former defense contractor with deep ties to the Academy's off-world logistics branch. "You always were too stubborn for your own good, Hayes," Kensington said smoothly, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. "This is a simple regime change. Economics. The princess is a liability to the new trade agreements." "She's a 20-year-old girl, Charles," Declan spat, trying to keep his gun raised. His vision was blurring. Blood loss was taking its toll. "She is currency," Tybalt corrected in his melodic clicking accent. "The syndicate requires payment for their services. A royal Altari, pristine and pure, will fetch a historic price in the deep-core slave markets. She will disappear, and you, human, will die." Aurelia looked back at Declan. Her large, luminescent violet eyes met his. "Survive," she mouthed silently before a syndicate guard struck her with the butt of a rifle, dropping her to her knees. Declan roared, forcing himself forward, but Kensington gave a lazy flick of his hand. A kinetic disruptor fired from a heavy's weapon, striking Declan point-blank. The world shattered into white-hot agony. The force threw him backward through a shattered window, sending him plummeting 3 stories down into the ornamental gardens below. The last thing Declan heard before the darkness took him was the sound of the transport ship's engines roaring to life, taking Aurelia away into the cold void of the slave trade. When Declan woke, the sky above the capital was choked with ash and military cruisers. It was night. Rain poured down, washing the blood and mud from his tactical vest. Every breath was a knife in his ribs. He dragged himself out of the thorny alien flora, his body running on pure, unadulterated human spite. He patched his wounds in the ruins of the garden armory. He used biofoam to seal the plasma burn on his shoulder and popped a handful of synthetic amphetamines from his survival kit. His mind was startlingly clear. The political reality was obvious. Kensington's presence meant Earth Command was either complicit or turning a blind eye to secure the isotope trade. The Altari government was compromised. The police were dead or bought. Declan had no badge, no jurisdiction, and no backup. What he did have was a list of contacts from his days doing Black Ops wet work in the rings of Saturn, and a very specific set of skills that the wider galaxy vastly underestimated. To the galactic community, humans were considered barbaric, short-lived, and recklessly violent. Declan was about to show them exactly how violent a human could be. He found a functional communication terminal in the security bunker, bypassed the royal encryption using codes Aurelia had trusted him with, and sent a single, heavily encrypted pulse message to a dive bar on the human mining colony of New Detroit. The message was 3 words long. Call the pack. The asteroid station known as the Anvil sat on the fringes of the Sol system, a wretched hive of smugglers, corporate deserters, and mercenaries. In the back of a dimly lit cantina smelling of ozone and cheap synthetic whiskey, 3 men sat around a rusted metal table. There was Donovan, a massive, heavily scarred heavy weapons specialist who had been dishonorably discharged from the orbital drop regiments. Next to him was Carter, a twitchy, hyperlethal tech savant who had once hacked a Chinese orbital defense satellite for a dare. Across from them sat Mitchell, a cold-eyed sniper who had worked alongside Declan during the brutal Jupiter insurgencies. The door to the back room slid open, and Declan walked in. He looked like a ghost. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, and his left arm was heavily bandaged. But the aura of cold, calculating rage rolling off him silenced the room immediately. "Declan," Donovan rumbled, sliding a glass of whiskey across the table. "You look like you tried to headbutt a dropship." Declan ignored the drink. He slammed a holographic projector onto the table. It flared to life, showing the glowing, rotating crest of the Crimson Syndicate alongside surveillance footage of Prime Minister Tybalt and Ambassador Kensington. "The Altari princess was taken," Declan said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Sold to the Syndicate. Kensington is involved. The whole damn UED diplomatic corps might be bought." Carter whistled through his teeth, adjusting his mechanical ocular implant. "You're talking about hitting a Syndicate slaver operation backed by Earth's own political brass? Hayes, that's not a rescue mission. That's a declaration of war. I have 2 million credits in an offshore Zurich account," Declan said, leaning over the table, planting his knuckles on the rusted surface. "It's yours, all of it. But I need to hit the Syndicate's primary transit hub on the mining rock of Xylar 9. We have a 48-hour window before they move her out of the inner systems and into the deep core auction houses. If she crosses that line, she's gone forever." Mitchell picked up the whiskey Declan had ignored and took a slow sip. 2 million is a lot of money, but going up against the Syndicate, they have plasma shielding, heavy mechs, and alien biology we can barely pronounce. "They rely on technology," Declan countered. "They rely on intimidation and the belief that no one is crazy enough to breach a fortified asteroid without a naval fleet. They don't know how human infantry fights in close quarters. They don't know CQB." Donovan grinned, a terrifying, jagged expression. "Shotguns and flashbangs in a pressurized tin can?" "Exactly," Declan said. 12 hours later, an unregistered freighter, registered under a dummy corporation linked to a defunct SpaceX subsidiary, dropped out of hyperspace in the shadow of Xylar 9. The asteroid was a massive hollowed-out rock bristling with anti-ship cannons and energy shields. It was designed to repel a siege. It was not designed to detect 4 humans doing a halo jump from a stealth dropship, free-falling through the vacuum of space in radar-absorbent void suits. They hit the exterior airlock of the Syndicate facility hard. Carter bypassed the biometric locks in less than 60 seconds, overriding the alien syntax with brute-force algorithmic scripts he'd stolen from a DARPA server years ago. The airlock cycled with a hiss. The inner doors slid open. Two syndicate guards, towering multi-eyed insectoids armed with heavy pulse rifles, turned in surprise. They were expecting a diplomatic envoy or perhaps a delivery of spices. They received a 12-gauge depleted uranium slug to the thorax. Donovan's combat shotgun roared, the sound deafening in the confined corridor. The kinetic force picked the heavy aliens off their feet and slammed them against the bulkhead, bypassing their energy shields entirely. The shields were designed to deflect high-velocity energy weapons, not massive, slow-moving chunks of dense metal. Breaching clear, Declan barked, dropping his void helmet and raising a compact submachine gun. The facility descended into pure, terrifying chaos. To the syndicate slavers, the attack made no sense. No alarms had triggered on the external perimeter. The intruders moved with a synchronized, predatory fluidity that alien mercenaries rarely displayed. Humans didn't fight with honorable duels or ceremonial posturing. They fought to eradicate. They moved through the holding cells, leaving a trail of shattered syndicate enforcers in their wake. Mitchell covered the long corridors, his sniper rifle snapping with suppressed cracks, putting rounds through the eye sockets of any guard that peeked around a corner. Carter laid down electronic countermeasures, blinding the facility's internal sensors and plunging the complex into darkness, lit only by the strobe of human muzzle flashes. Declan kicked open the doors to the central manifesting room. A syndicate overseer, a bloated reptilian creature wearing silks, scrambled backward, frantically trying to erase the data terminal. Declan shot him in the kneecap. The alien shrieked, collapsing in a heap of green blood and silk. Declan holstered his weapon, grabbed the overseer by the scaled throat, and slammed him against the glowing console. "Where is the Altari girl? Where is Aurelia?" "You are dead, human," the overseer hissed, spitting acidic saliva. "The auction is already proceeding. She is a prize of the High Lords now." Declan drew a combat knife, the steel gleaming in the red emergency lights. He didn't say a word. He just pressed the blade under the creature's jaw. "Sector 4, the overseer choked out. "The Karen Delta Penal Colony. The auction is being held in the old titanium mines. She's there. Please, the syndicate will." Declan drove the hilt of the knife into the alien's temple, knocking him unconscious. He turned to the terminal. Carter was already jacking into the mainframe. "He's telling the truth," Carter said, his fingers flying across his holographic interface. "But Declan, look at this manifest." Declan looked at the screen. The buyer who had secured the opening bid for Princess Aurelia wasn't an alien crime lord. It was a shell company, a company registered on Earth, under the direct control of Ambassador Kensington. "He didn't just sell her out," Mitchell said quietly, stepping into the room. "He's buying her back through a proxy." "Why?" "Leverage." Declan realized, his blood running cold. "He wants to hold the true heir hostage. With Tybalt in power and Aurelia in his private dungeon, Kensington effectively owns the Altari isotope trade. He's going to use her to turn their world into a human corporate colony." Declan's grip tightened on his weapon until his knuckles turned white. It was no longer just a rescue mission. It was a crusade against his own kind. "Set the charges," Declan ordered, turning his back on the burning data room. "We blow this rock and we set course for Karen Delta. We're going to crash an auction." The Karen Delta Penal Colony was a jagged scar on the face of a dead moon. Decades ago, human mining conglomerates had hollowed out the lunar crust in search of titanium and palladium, leaving behind a sprawling subterranean labyrinth of reinforced tunnels and massive cavernous processing bays. When the veins ran dry, the corporations, shadowy subsidiaries of familiar Earth entities like Glencore and Rio Tinto, abandoned the facility. The Crimson Syndicate had quickly claimed the vacuum, transforming the deep core mines into an impenetrable fortress for their most lucrative illicit transactions. The stealth dropship cut through the moon's exosphere with its thermal dampeners running at maximum capacity, rendering it virtually invisible to standard orbital radar. Inside the cramped troop bay, the red jump lights painted the faces of Declan, Donovan, Carter, and Mitchell in a hellish glow. The air smelled of weapon oil, adrenaline, and cold sweat. Carter sat cross-legged, a heavy decryption terminal strapped to his thighs. He was running a modified version of a Stuxnet-derived cyber weapon tailored specifically to dismantle the alien firewall architecture protecting the mine's blast doors. "I'm in," Carter muttered, his fingers flying across the holographic keys. "The Syndicate is using a decentralized mesh network, primitive by DARPA standards. I've isolated the primary auction hall. It's in the lowest titanium vault, 2 miles beneath the surface." "What about localized security?" Declan asked, checking the action on his SIG Sauer MCX assault rifle. He had swapped the standard ammunition for armor-piercing depleted uranium rounds. "Heavy," Carter replied, wincing as he processed the telemetry. "I'm counting at least 40 thermal signatures in the main hall, a mix of Syndicate enforcers and private contractors. And Declan, I'm intercepting comms chatter with encryption protocols that belong to the United Earth Directorate. Kensington isn't just using a proxy. He has off-the-books human military personnel on site." Donovan racked his combat shotgun with a mechanical clack that cut through the low hum of the ship's engines. "Good. I was getting tired of shooting bugs and lizards. Let's see how these corporate stooges handle a real breach." The dropship didn't land. It hovered silently above a massive thermal exhaust vent that plummeted straight down into the subterranean facility. One by one, the 4 men fast-roped into the pitch-black abyss, plunging into the belly of the Syndicate stronghold. They moved with the silent, predatory grace that had made human special operators a whispered myth among the galactic underworld. At the bottom of the shaft, they encountered their first patrol. 3 Syndicate bruisers and 2 human mercenaries wearing unmarked tactical gear. Mitchell didn't wait for an order. His suppressed rifle coughed twice in rapid succession. The 2 human mercenaries dropped instantly, their ceramic armor completely failing to stop the hypervelocity rounds. Before the alien bruisers could raise their energy weapons, Declan and Donovan were on them. It was a masterclass in kinetic brutality. Knives flashed in the dim emergency lighting, severing vocal cords and puncturing vital organs. The patrol was neutralized in under 4 seconds without a single alarm being triggered. They stacked up outside the massive blast-reinforced doors of the primary auction hall. Inside, the scene was a grotesque display of galactic wealth and depravity. Hundreds of alien crime lords, corrupt diplomats, and corporate magnates sat on velvet-lined repulsor chairs, sipping glowing narcotics while slaves of a dozen different species were paraded across a raised titanium platform. And then she was brought out. Princess Aurelia of the House of Altari looked frail but unbroken. Heavy magnetic cuffs bound her wrists, and the barcode branded onto her neck glowed with a sickening red hue. A collective murmur of awe rippled through the audience. The auctioneer, a towering 4-armed entity draped in synthetic gold, began to speak, but his voice was immediately drowned out by a bid from the front row. A human man in a sharp charcoal suit stood up. He was flanked by 4 heavily armed guards wearing the insignia of the Constellus Group, a notorious Earth-based private military company. It was Gallagher, Ambassador Kensington's chief fixer. 2 billion credits, Gallagher announced, his voice amplified across the cavernous room. On behalf of the Earth Trade Coalition. The room fell dead silent. No one dared bid against the ruthless financial backing of humanity's corporate empire. The auctioneer slammed his ceremonial gavel. Sold. Outside the heavy doors, Declan felt a cold, calculated fury settle over him. The mission had just changed from a rescue to a full-scale assault against his own species' corrupt establishment. "Blow the doors," Declan ordered, pulling down his ballistic mask. Carter attached a localized shape charge to the center of the heavy metal doors. "Fire in the hole." The explosion was a deafening crack of thunder that shattered the oppressive silence of the auction hall. The blast doors didn't just open. They were violently blown off their hinges, crushing a dozen Syndicate guards under tons of twisted steel. Before the smoke could even begin to clear, the human team flooded the room. Flashbang grenades sailed through the air, detonating with blinding white light and ear-shattering concussive force. The alien attendees, whose biology lacked the robust inner ear stability and visual recovery of humans, shrieked in absolute disorientation. Many collapsed, vomiting from the sudden disruption of their equilibrium. Declan moved through the chaos like a reaper. He didn't fire wildly. Every squeeze of his trigger was a measured, lethal decision. He put 3 rounds into the chest of a Constellus guard, stepped over the falling body, and shifted his aim to the auction platform. Gallagher drew a sidearm, wildly aiming at the smoke, but Mitchell's sniper round took off his hand at the wrist. Gallagher screamed, dropping to his knees. Aurelia stood frozen on the platform, her violet eyes wide as she watched the sheer, terrifying efficiency of human warfare unfold. She had known Declan as a quiet, stoic bodyguard who stood by doors and vetted her schedule. She had never seen the monster that lurked beneath his professional exterior. Declan vaulted onto the platform, grabbing Gallagher by the lapels of his ruined suit and throwing him off the stage. He reached Aurelia, pulling a decryption key from his vest to release her magnetic bindings. "I told you I'd come," Declan said, his voice distorted through the tactical mask. Aurelia looked at the carnage, the blood, and the terrified, cowering aliens. "You started a war for me." "No," Declan replied, chambering a fresh magazine as the remaining syndicate forces began to regroup at the far end of the hall. "I'm just finishing the one they started. Now stay behind me. We're fighting our way out." The initial shock and awe assault had bought them precisely 3 minutes of tactical superiority, but the syndicate was vast, and the Constellus mercenaries were highly trained veterans of Earth's resource wars. By the time Declan led Aurelia off the platform, the cavernous auction hall was swarming with reinforcements. "We are cut off," Carter yelled over the deafening roar of plasma fire and kinetic impacts. He was crouched behind a shattered repulsor chair, furiously tapping into a portable terminal while bullets sparked and ricocheted off the titanium pillars around them. "They've locked down the primary elevators. The only way out is through the old mining tunnels to the north, but they are heavily fortified." "Donovan, suppressing fire," Declan barked, pushing Aurelia down behind the reinforced base of the auction block. Donovan stepped out from cover, an absolute juggernaut of violence. He hoisted a heavy belt-fed rotary machine gun, a modified M134 minigun that fired caseless tungsten rounds. The weapon unleashed a terrifying buzzsaw roar, spitting a stream of lead so dense it looked like a solid beam of fire. The suppressive fire tore through the syndicate ranks, shredding alien energy shields through sheer kinetic overload and ripping the Constellus mercenaries to pieces. "Move! Move!" Declan grabbed Aurelia's hand, pulling her toward the northern exit archway, while Donovan kept the enemy pinned down. Mitchell covered their flank, his sniper rifle methodically eliminating any target that tried to flank them. They burst into the darkened, dust-choked mining tunnel, the air suddenly freezing cold. The walls were lined with rusted excavation machinery and abandoned rail carts. Declan pushed Aurelia behind a heavy drilling rig, panting heavily. His left shoulder, injured during the palace coup, was screaming in agony, bleeding fresh crimson through his bandages. Before they could catch their breath, the heavy steel gate at the far end of the tunnel crashed open. A dozen Constellus operators poured in, their tactical lights piercing the gloom. They weren't moving like disorganized thugs. They were executing a textbook military pincer movement. A voice crackled to life over the tunnel's PA system, echoing off the cold stone walls. It was Ambassador Kensington. "I have to admit, Hayes, I am genuinely impressed." Kensington's smooth aristocratic voice echoed. "Palantir's predictive algorithms gave you a 0.2% chance of breaching the facility, let alone making it to the auction block. You always were an unpredictable variable." "Call off your dogs, Charles," Declan shouted back into the cavernous darkness, checking his ammunition. He had 2 magazines left. "You don't understand the scale of what you are interfering with, Declan." Kensington's voice was remarkably calm. "This isn't just about controlling the Altari trade. The Altari royal bloodline, Aurelia's specific biological signature, is the genetic key to unlocking the deep core zero vaults on their homeworld. Without her alive, the vaults remain sealed. With her in my custody, Earth becomes the undisputed economic master of this quadrant. I am securing the future of humanity." You're running a slave ring to line your own pockets, you corporate parasite, Donovan roared, reloading his heavy weapon. I am building an empire, Kensington corrected coldly. Kill the men. Take the princess alive. Shoot her in the legs if you have to. The Constellus operators advanced, laying down a punishing wall of suppressing fire. Carter took a grazing hit to the ribs, crying out as he collapsed against the tunnel wall. Mitchell was pinned behind a rail cart, unable to establish a clear line of sight. Declan looked at Aurelia. She was trembling, not from fear, but from a profound, world-shattering realization. Her entire life, her family's legacy, had been boiled down to a biological lockpick for human greed. Declan, she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady over the gunfire. If they take me, my world burns. If I die here, the vaults remain sealed forever. Earth gets nothing. The Syndicate gets nothing. You're not dying here, Declan growled, his eyes locking onto hers. The fierce loyalty in his gaze was absolute. It was the terrifying, beautiful paradox of humanity capable of the most horrific betrayals and the most uncompromising devotion. I didn't cross the galaxy to let a suit in an office win. Declan turned to Donovan. The massive gunner was already nodding, understanding the grim calculus of their situation. I've got this choke point, Donovan said, a bloody grin spreading across his face as he locked his final belt of ammunition into the rotary gun. Take the side service shaft. It leads up to the ventilation arrays. You can signal the dropship from there. Donovan, Declan started, but the heavy weapons specialist cut him off. Get her out of here, boss. Show these alien bastards in corporate suits why they shouldn't poke a sleeping bear. Declan grabbed Aurelia, dragging her toward the rusted access hatch on the tunnel wall. As he heaved the heavy iron door open, he looked back one last time. Donovan stepped into the center of the tunnel, entirely out of cover. He didn't flinch as the bullets sparked around him. He just pulled the trigger. The rotary gun roared to life, a deafening declaration of human defiance against impossible odds. The tunnel was illuminated by the continuous, blinding strobe of muzzle flash. Declan pushed Aurelia into the vertical service shaft and began to climb, the metallic screams and thunderous gunfire echoing below them. Halfway up the shaft, the shooting stopped, replaced by a series of massive localized explosions. Donovan had detonated his remaining thermal grenades, bringing the tunnel roof down on himself and the advancing mercenaries. Silence, thick and suffocating, rushed in to fill the void. Declan didn't stop climbing. He hauled himself and Aurelia up through the narrow, suffocating pipe until they finally broke through the ventilation grate, spilling out onto the desolate, freezing surface of Karen Delta. Above them, the sky was a blanket of harsh, uncaring stars. But as Declan activated his emergency beacon, a shadow detached itself from the darkness. The stealth dropship descended rapidly, its loading ramp lowering before it even touched the ground. They had made it out of the vault, but as Declan pulled Aurelia aboard the ship, he checked his terminal. A massive fleet of United Earth Directorate cruisers had just dropped out of hyperspace, blocking their escape route. Kensington had brought the entire corrupt armada. The real war was just beginning. Mitchell fought the yoke of the stealth dropship, his hands flying across the tactical console as warning klaxons flooded the cockpit with a harsh, strobe-like crimson glare. Through the reinforced armaglass viewport, the desolate, frozen horizon of Karen Delta was entirely eclipsed by the colossal silhouettes of the United Earth Directorate's naval vanguard. At the center of the blockade hung the UES Manticore, a dreadnought of unimaginable destructive capability, flanked by a dozen heavy cruisers. Their hull plating, forged from hyperdense alloys funded by off-world defense contracts with Lockheed Martin, gleamed under the harsh starlight. Massive railgun batteries and plasma lance turrets were slowly pivoting, locking their targeting telemetry directly onto the tiny, insignificant dropship. They have a hard lock on our fusion signature, Mitchell yelled over the screaming roar of the engines. He banked the ship violently to starboard, attempting to break the missile lock, but the UED targeting computers were too fast. If they fire, we don't even get to be space dust. We just become a statistical error. In the troop bay, Declan braced himself against the bulkhead. His good arm wrapped tightly around Aurelia to keep her from being thrown across the deck. Carter lay slumped in a crash seat, his tactical vest soaked with blood from the gunshot wound to his ribs. A heavy auto-injector of synthetic morphine jammed into his thigh. The ship's internal comms crackled, the static abruptly replaced by a forced, crystal-clear channel override. The holographic projector in the center of the bay flickered to life, projecting the immaculate, smiling visage of Ambassador Charles Kensington. He was standing on the bridge of the Manticore, looking utterly unbothered by the trail of bodies Declan had left in his wake. Declan, Declan, Declan. Kensington's voice echoed, dripping with manufactured sympathy. I truly commend your spirit. You waged a glorious, bloody little crusade. You even took down a Constellus heavy assault squad, which will frankly ruin my quarterly expense reports. But this is the end of the line. The board is set and checkmate has been declared. Aurelia stepped forward, stepping out of Declan's grip. She stood tall, her violet eyes burning with a regal fury that stripped away any illusion of her being a helpless victim. You are a traitor to your own species, Kensington. You break the fundamental laws of your United Earth. Kensington chuckled, adjusting his silk tie. My dear princess, the laws of Earth are written by men with capital, men backed by BlackRock, Interstellar, and the Vanguard Group. The galactic economy requires your biological signature to open those zero-point vaults. Tybalt is waiting for my signal to legitimize our corporate partnership. Surrender the dropship, hand over the princess, and I will let your men live. Defy me, and I will order the Manticore to vaporize you, and I will simply clone her remains to bypass the genetic lock. Declan walked up to the holoprojector. He didn't look defeated. He looked like a man who was exactly where he wanted to be. You always were too focused on the big picture, Charles, Declan said coldly, his voice devoid of any panic. You forgot about the ground game. You forgot what happens when infantry breaches your perimeter. Kensington frowned slightly. What are you talking about? Declan looked over his shoulder at the wounded tech specialist. Carter, are we synced? Carter spat a wad of blood onto the deck plates, his fingers dancing weakly, but with blinding speed across his portable military terminal. Sync complete, boss. I bypassed their localized firewall when they foolishly forced a direct comms handshake with our ship. You see, Charles, Declan said, turning back to the hologram. We didn't just come to Karen Delta to shoot up a slave market. While Donovan was blowing the blast doors, and I was making a mess of your Constellus goons, Carter was plugged directly into the Syndicate's decentralized mesh network. The same network your personal encrypted ledgers were currently interfaced with to process the 2 billion credit transaction. Kensington's smile vanished entirely. The color drained from his face. I have your shadow accounts, Declan continued, his voice rising, carrying the brutal weight of a death sentence. I have the backchannel communications between you and Prime Minister Tybalt, proving the assassination of the Altari Royal Guard. But more importantly, I have the digital paper trail showing you used UED military assets to conduct unsanctioned slavery operations, defrauding the Earth Trade Coalition, and violating the Geneva Accords. You aren't building an empire, Charles. You're a rogue asset committing treason. Cut the feed. Kensington screamed to someone off camera, his composure shattering. Vaporize that dropship right now. Too late, Carter groaned, slamming his hand down on the enter key. Executing Protocol Icarus. A massive burst of encrypted telemetry blasted from the dropship's comms array. It didn't target the Manticore. It targeted every single heavy cruiser in the UED fleet, transmitting the unredacted files directly to the localized command screens of every captain, navigator, and gunnery officer in the Armada. Simultaneously, Carter routed the data burst through the solar system's subspace buoys, broadcasting it to Earth's major news syndicates, corporate boards, and the Autarky High Command. For 10 agonizing seconds, the sky was silent. The railguns remained locked on the dropship. Declan held his breath, his hand resting on his sidearm. Then the holographic projection of Kensington flickered. Alarms began to blare in the background of his feed. Ambassador Kensington. A new voice cut over the fleet-wide frequency. It was Admiral Reyes, the highest-ranking naval officer in the Armada, broadcasting from one of the flanking cruisers. Her voice was pure, lethal ice. "You are hereby relieved of command under Article 4 of the United Earth Treason Act. Stand down and prepare to be boarded, or you will be fired upon." "Reyes, listen to me," Kensington stammered, backing away from the camera. "This is a fabrication. A deepfake designed by Target locks reacquired." Mitchell shouted from the cockpit, a wild grin spreading across his face. "But they aren't looking at us anymore. The fleet just painted the Manticore." Outside the viewport, the massive railguns of the UED cruisers pivoted away from the dropship, aiming directly at the command bridge of Kensington's flagship. The trap had sprung, but it had snapped shut on the Hunter. "Get us out of here, Mitchell," Declan ordered, the adrenaline finally beginning to recede, leaving behind the crushing exhaustion of a war fought and won. The stealth dropship punched its thrusters, tearing away from Karen Delta and vanishing into the black void of space, leaving the United Earth Directorate to clean up its own mess. 3 months later, the Altari capital was rebuilt, stronger and far wiser than before. Prime Minister Tybalt had been executed for high treason, and Charles Kensington was rotting in a maximum security black site beneath the Pacific Ocean on Earth, awaiting a tribunal that would undoubtedly strip him of his life. Princess Aurelia stood on the balcony of the royal spire, wearing the sovereign crown of her people. She was no longer just a figurehead. She was a hardened ruler who understood the ruthless mechanics of the galaxy. Standing a few paces behind her, wearing the sleek dark armor of the newly formed Royal Vanguard, was Declan. He was no longer a hired mercenary or a simple bodyguard. He was the supreme commander of the Altari Defense Forces. Aurelia turned to him, the setting sun catching the violet hues of her eyes. "They fear us now, Declan. The Syndicate, the corporate conglomerates. They know Earth and Altari stand together, uncorrupted." Declan offered a rare, slight smile, his hand resting comfortably on the hilt of his kinetic sidearm. "Let them fear us, Your Majesty. Humans are very good at holding a grudge, and we never leave our own behind." Thank you for listening to this HFY Sci-Fi drama. If you enjoyed Declan's relentless crusade and the thrilling twist to save Princess Aurelia, please smash that like button and share the video with your fellow sci-fi fans. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another epic tale of human absolute badassery in the deep cosmos. Let me know your favorite moment in the comments below.